Well, hello and welcome to Understand Men Now. I'm Jonathan Aslay of jonathanashlay.com, and I'm so excited to be doing this live stream for you today. Our topic, the 7 ways to survive a long distance relationship. Let's figure out how to survive these things. Really quickly, if you're brand new to my YouTube channel, please hit the subscribe button, hit the bell so you can be notified of new videos. And if anytime during this video the content resonates with you, please hit that like button so I can be seen in the YouTube algorithms. Really quickly, my coaching is what I call heart-centered radical honesty. It's direct, a little tough love, and a lot of heart. And occasionally I use expletives to enhance a sentence. So if an F-bomb or two isn't your cup of tea, I suggest logging off right now. Lastly, these are my thoughts, my perceptions, my opinions. By no means do I suggest this is the truth. You have to decide the truth for yourself. I'm a bit of a contrarian, so my advice goes contrary to public opinion and tradition. All right, let's jump into those 7 ways to figure out how to survive long distance relationships. It's interesting, before these little devices, before the internet, long distance relationships look something like this, or at least this is what I remembered growing up with. You met someone at a singles, like a, what was that singles thing? Down oh god, what was that singles event where you go down to Mexico and hang out? There's a name for like Cancun and places like that. I can't think of it right now, but you go to a singles event, you meet, you live in California, they live in New York, you meet up there, and somehow you tried to figure out how to make a relationship work. I'm thinking back in the 70s and the 80s. What was those singles things called? Someone posted for me, I can't remember. All right. And certainly, throughout the years, there have been people who have been in relationship where they lived in the same town, then some person had to move, and they had to, their relationship continued from a long distance perspective. And this is certainly true of people who are in the military and such like that. I'm not going to lean into those conversations. What I want to lean into today is, because of the internet and because most people aren't meeting organically these days as they once did, certainly when we lived in small tribes and villages and towns, or maybe the college you went to, or maybe your work environment. These days, roughly about 50% of all new relationships for people over 45 years old is happening through an online connection. And there's a good chance that number is going to go much higher. So now we have access to people that we wouldn't otherwise have at our fingertips, or at least the perception that we have access to people. So what happens is, you might live in a town, like I live in a city where there's 100,000 people, and yet I don't know who's single. So we go on our little devices. And yet the thing is, unless you keep your parameters very narrow from a distance perspective, many people open up their parameters, maybe 10 miles, 20 miles, 50 miles, 100 miles, some people across the country, and some people even internationally. So what I'm going to lean in today talking about long distance relationships, I want to differentiate between the 1 to 2 hour drive, the 1 hour plane ride kind of thing, or maybe that would represent a 5 or 6 hour drive. Certainly those relationships that are truly long distance, I mean, where you are in another state or you're across the country for those who live in the United States. And then there's international connections as well. And I see a huge proliferation of this happening. So I'm going to tailor this kind of contemplating a few of these, because I think it's important to look at them slightly differently when somebody lives an hour or two away versus someone that's a plane ride away across the country, or maybe a different continent. So part of the belief of a number of people choose long distance relationships because they have a belief that there's nobody in the town that they live in. There's literally no one person in the town they live in that is suitable for them. It oftentimes cracks me up when I hear people I live in Los Angeles, and say, I can't find a good person in Los Angeles, so I'm going to go searching in Dallas, Texas, or New York, or Oklahoma, or whatever. It fascinates me, because those people in Dallas, Texas going, oh my God, I can't find anybody in my town. Let me go look in Los Angeles. Let me look in New York. Let me look in Seattle. Now, I know some people actually do look in certain areas because they're actually contemplating moving to those areas. Now, that's certainly something I can appreciate and understand. If you're actually planning on physically moving to an area, you might want to do searches that way. And yet, if for those who live in metropolitan places that have a belief there's no good people out there, trust me, searching in a different area isn't going to change that. And it's not going to make it any better searching in another area. Now, if you happen to live in bumfuck Egypt, and please forgive that one, but if you happen to live in a small town in Idaho, I can understand why you might feel that way, why you might want to open up your search parameters to a broader area, maybe to a metropolitan area, especially if you live in such a small town where you practically know everyone. It might feel as though there might not be someone in that town. Now, many people operate from this premise, from a limiting belief that there's no good person. And as I said a moment ago, and I just want to repeat this, if you don't believe there's a good person in the town you live in, it's not going to be better in any other town. So from a mindset perspective, that's just simply replacing one limiting belief with a fantasy belief replacing it. At least that's my perspective on that anyway. So, how to go about a long distance relationship? Well, first, for those that live an hour or two away, it's a little bit more convenient for meeting up versus those that live a plane ride away or across the country. So, I don't want to spend too much time talking about the people that live an hour or two away. I want to really lean into today the conversation for those that actually have to get onto a plane or would have to get in their car for 8 or 9 hours to be with someone. Okay. So I'm going to share the 7 ways to approach this going forward. And then I'm going to open it up for Q&A for those who are watching the live stream. And we'll have a brief discussion on this. Okay. So number 1, let me put on my trusty glasses, by the way. Number 1 is planning the first meeting. Oh, and by the way, before I begin this conversation, I want to be fully transparent. I actually watched a video from one of my contemporaries. His name is Evan Mark Katz, Katz. I watched one of his videos that he did on this subject, and I actually did truly appreciate the 7 tips he gave in long distance relationships. So this content is actually piggybacking on what he shared, although everything that he shared in his video is things that I've said, but I want to be fully transparent with my audience because if you happen to watch it, I am piggybacking on everything he said. So just a reminder, and I'll after I wrap up this podcast, I'll put a link to his to that video in the description later today. Okay, so going back to the 7 things to consider. Number 1 is planning the first meeting. Planning the first meeting. Are you going to fly to him? Is he going to fly to you? What would be the recommended protocol? Now, I know a lot of women oftentimes will get on a plane partially because they think if I make it convenient for the guy, he's going to like me more. Now, I'm not suggesting all women think this way, but there are some women that have this belief that they actually have to prove themselves to the guy. Now, I'm not a big advocate of operating from that perspective, but I'm certain that many women operate from that place. And then there's other women that operate from the place of, I just would like a vacation. I would love to, go from, bumfuck Egypt to Los Angeles to go visit someone. And yet from a safety perspective, it's probably more responsible to have the man come to you. I'm going to repeat that. From a safety perspective, it's more responsible to have the man come to you and probably have him stay at a hotel. Well, not have him stay, but don't offer that he can stay at your place. Because let me tell you something, and I've done a number of long distance where I've flown to women and they've allowed me stay at their place. And it's almost guaranteed that we'll have sex together. I mean, it's literally almost a guarantee. And oftentimes the escape clause a person uses when they don't want to proceed after they've gotten laid, their escape clause is, I've decided I don't want to do a long distance relationship. And let me tell you, a lot of men will jump on a plane just to get laid. I mean, on some level, for some men, that's cheaper than a hooker. I'm not suggesting this happens all the time. I'm just suggesting it happens. So If you don't know this person very well, if you haven't Googled him, if you haven't, stalked him on social media, if you haven't looked at his Facebook and his Instagram and all his different social medias, then I highly recommend to have him stay somewhere else for that first meeting. Now, I know that can be very awkward, especially if there's a big expense, but let's face it, whether it's the man or woman, if you're choosing this particular opportunity to connect with someone, then you've got to be able to accept the responsibility of the financial consequences that go along with this. So, again, differentiating between the 1 hour, 2 hour drive versus the plane ride across the country, or God forbid, international. And I'll spend a moment talking about that in a second. Number 2, I think it's important to discuss your communication desires. If you're engaging in a long distance relationship, then discuss, how do you want to communicate with each other? Is it text messages? Is it telephone calls? Is it FaceTime? And have a strategy and a conversation of how you're going to approach this from that perspective, so there isn't any ambiguity. Ladies, I know you love the idea that men are the hunters and they chase and they should be the leaders of the relationship, but this is setting your standard. And I encourage you that if the man isn't speaking up, then you speak up and express what your standard is, what you would desire in the form of communication if you're going to explore a relationship with someone that's long distance. And again, it's a plane ride away, cross country, that sort of thing. Number 3. Now, this is about how much time you should spend together. Now, I've always said it takes about 100 hours of face-to-face time to develop the first layer of trust. And that 100 hours isn't all in one weekend. I'm talking about roughly 5 hours over a 20-day period is where you build the first layer of trust, spending time with someone. So it requires spending regular time together. And if you're going to explore the idea of a long-distance relationship, then depending on the circumstances, then it should be built in that you're seeing each other at least every weekend, or if not every other weekend. But Jonathan, we live across country and I can't afford to do that. Well, folks, if you can't afford to actually build a relationship with someone, then don't explore a long distance relationship. You better have the bucks to do it. One of or both of you better have the bucks to do it. And if you don't, then don't engage in it. But Jonathan, he's the only person I met that I have chemistry with. Look, there's 8 billion people on the planet. You can have chemistry with 100,000 of those 8 billion people. It's out there. So don't believe that the one person you meet is the only person. That's fantasy thinking. Number 4, I highly recommend alternating between homes. Folks, if he flies to you and you've never been to his home, you have no idea. You don't know if he's married, what his lifestyle is. Is he a hoarder? Is he a nut job? You certainly want to find that out sooner rather than later, but certainly alternate homes when you're getting to know each other. That's what people do when they live around the corner with each other. And you should apply that same standard when you're doing a long distance relationship. And number 5, understand that sometimes getting together for a weekend is a great bubble. I call these bubble relationships. You have all this fun, you have a great time, you have lots of sex, and then you go back to your respective homes, back to your normality. So one thing you may want to consider is spending an extended period in one or both of your homes, 1 or 2 weeks at a time, to actually feel what it's like to be with this person at a longer engagement period. But Jonathan, I have a full-time job. I can't do that. Well, folks, again, if you have circumstances that doesn't allow you to genuinely get to know another human being at a deeper, intimate level, then don't invest in doing a long distance relationship. This is not for the faint of heart, and it's going to take some bucks, and it's going to take some planning to do this, and it's going to take some compromises as well. So it's recommended that you spend time, a good 2-week period of time together in each other's homes at separate periods, to really see how well you work together in that capacity. By the way, I'm going under the premise that those of you that are watching this desire a serious long-term relationship. For those of you that seek a casual relationship, you can do whatever the fuck you want. If you're seeking a situationship, do whatever you want. If you're seeking friends with benefits, do whatever you want. This is recommended for those who are seeking something grander than just what I just shared. Okay. Oh, number 6, make sure you include your family and friends. Once you've established that you're in a relationship with each other, include your family and friends in this process. We need our community to be part of the decision-making process. And certainly, when people have conflict with your family and friends, it makes it very difficult to build the deeper roots of trust if you're not incorporating your community in the process. If you're not incorporating your community in the process. And number 7 is you're going to have to discuss the hard topic of who's going to move to your respective area or your respective home. You got to have that hard conversation. And I wouldn't wait much past the 6-month mark if you're doing this. Now, again, if you're in that 1 or 2 hour drive situation, it's a whole different ballgame than if it's an airplane. And I wouldn't invest in any long distance relationship unless you have a plan of how we're going to take this from long distance to short distance. And I'm not suggesting you have to move in with someone, but it's important to have a plan and to have the hard conversation. Because many people engage in long distance relationship. As I said before, it's a beautiful, lovely fantasy. I've done it before. I was in a long distance relationship where we lived 35 miles away, which is roughly about an hour and 15-minute drive. And that we made that work over a 6-year, well, it didn't work out long term, but it had nothing to do with the distance. But I can tell you, if you're doing long distance and you're barely seeing each other, you're not going to build the deeper roots of trust to actually establish that you have the capacity to make this work from long term. It takes planning. And I've just laid out 7 different things to consider in your plan. Now, there is a book you may want to read. It's called Living Together Apart. These are for people that may not want to actually live together at some point. This book by Ann Watson called Living Together Apart. And I highly recommend, before either one of you flies out to see each other, I highly recommend, before the penis goes inside the vagina, purchase 2 copies of the book, 8 Dates by Doctors John and Julie Gottman. Look, folks, if you're going to do long distance, this is a great book to start talking about how are we going to make this work if we're going to invest in each other. This is the mechanics to a healthy, happy relationship. And I invite you to, this is, by the way, the beauty of long distance is you can, ladies, if the guy wants your vagina, he should be reading this book. And it's a lot easier to make that happen when you're engaging in a long distance than it is around the corner when you can meet someone in roughly 24 or 48 hours. All right. Is this sinking in? Is this resonating? Please let me know by hitting that thumbs up button or mention amen in the chat. All right. Well, that covers the 7 ways to survive a long distance relationship. I hope you found value in this. Again, I'm not a big proponent of people engaging in long distance relationships. It's hard enough to make relationships work when people live in the same town. And certainly you have to be way more intentional versus the fantasy bubble. And I mentioned international before. I've spoken to a number of women who engage in international dating under the fantasy that they're going to, they spend months and months connecting with a guy via the internet, and they fly out to meet him with the expectation of a marriage proposal at the end of that rainbow, if you will. And that is purely fantasy thinking. And a lot of people engage in long distance from a fantasy perspective and not a reality-based perspective. So some of you got to pull your head out of your fucking ass and recognize that a relationship is going to take effort. It's going to take effort, and it's going to take monumental effort if you're choosing to go the long distance route. And that's my perception on that. All right, we're going to take questions for a few minutes. So if you're familiar with my format, if you're on the live stream right now, post a question by writing the word question, post the question thereafter, or you can purchase a super sticker, super chat. There's a little $ sign at the bottom of the chat box. And the super sticker, super chat, all the monies go to a scholarship fund in the name of my son, Connor Aslay. This is my son, Connor, right there and right there. He's my son who passed away a few years ago. And in his honor, I started a scholarship fund to help defray the cost of personal development for those folks who are seeking personal development work, and to give to the charities that I believe truly make a difference in the world, like the Hoffman Process and Insight. So if you have a question, purchase the super sticker, super chat, or write the word question there. All right, let's go scrolling. Let's go swimming. Ingrid says, Jonathon, great advice. Thank goodness I did all this. Issues take longer to appear when issues appear. Believe them. Exactly. Sin says 2 hours away is my maximum distance, and I'm willing to live away from someone I want to date. There you go. All right. Jennifer says, long distance is hard to connect in an authentic way. That is true. By the way, folks, let me just, I didn't say this earlier, but I just want all of you women to know, ladies to know, men do not fall in love over the telephone. We do not bond over the telephone. The way we bond with someone is social activities, hobbies, mutual interests, spending time with family and friends, traveling together, and having sex together. We don't bond over the telephone. In fact, we only use the telephone for therapy. Therapy. Some men and women will spend months and months and months talking to each other, and all it does is it's replacing going to therapy. A lot of people are engaging in long distance, and it's just a glorified therapy session to dump their problems. But to women, it's like music to your ears. He's being vulnerable with me because he's complaining about his life. Complaining is not vulnerability. Seeking to improve oneself after one is expressed a insecurity is vulnerability. So ladies, be very careful of this incessant communication on long distance, because all this is, as my Pilates instructor calls these men, AT&T. These are men that are just using you for therapy. In fact, I have a video I posted a few days ago about that, so you may want to check that out. All right, so how online dating has now become the new form of therapy. So just be mindful of that. All right, Glenn has just posted a question. Question, is it a bad time to date when you're between jobs and not financially stable? I got my insurance license this year and haven't had a paycheck since the summer. Great question, Glenn. And by the way, I used to be an insurance broker. I had an insurance license. So here's the thing. There is kind of a double standard here. Women would most likely never date a man who doesn't have a job, because women look at men from a provider protector perspective. So women are less likely to date someone who is in between jobs. Now, with that said, men typically don't equate what a woman does professionally as part of their decision-making process in choosing someone. I'm saying typically that's the case. So you can have someone who's financially successful, doesn't care if he's dating a waiter or a lawyer. To a man, that usually doesn't matter. And if someone's in between jobs, that usually doesn't matter. However, I think that's changing substantially. I think it is, men now use the same standards women use in choosing a mate. And professionally, if someone isn't working, and I know some men will not take on women who have debt in their life because they don't want to be responsible for that. So with that said, there's always the exception to the rule. I'm just going to say, more often than not, it's not going to be a problem, but it's certainly something to be mindful of. And just recognize, if the foundation underneath you isn't solid, it's going to be very difficult to build a relationship if your own life doesn't feel solid. And it's important, by the way, it is very important to create a solid foundation for yourself and choose people that have a solid foundation for themselves, because people that are going through chaos in their life, and I'm talking, there's garden variety chaos and then there's extreme chaos. It makes it very difficult for them to lean into a relationship. So Glenn, that was a great question. Thank you so much for bringing that up. I really appreciate it. All right. Elizabeth says, do men really love bitches? Do men? Yes, they do. Let me tell you what a bitch stands for. Beauty or babe. Babe in total control of herself. Beauty or babe in total control of herself. A woman who is aligned with her sovereignty, her self-worth, her self-esteem, her self-confidence is one of the most attractive women to be with. This is a woman who genuinely loves on herself. And if you're not familiar with my book, What the Heck is Self-Love Anyway? There's a link below to get my book. The woman who genuinely is in her empowerment is the most attractive woman to the emotionally healthy man. To the controlling man, to the emotionally dysfunctional man, he's not attracted to a woman in her empowerment, okay? He's not attracted to that woman. Now, the idea of men loves bitches is the concept that when a woman is a pain in the ass, men will seek that type of woman. Let me just tell you something. Men who have a weak sense of self will gravitate to ball busting type of women because they have a weak sense of themselves. But do you want to be a bitch to attract those kind of guys? Or do you want to be the empowered woman that attracts the empowered guy? So then just remember, babe in total control of herself. That's what a bitch represents to me. So thank you so much for that question. I really appreciate it. All right, Sadie's question. This will probably be the last for the day. Question. Jonathan, I'm chatting to a guy on a dating site. He hid his profile and active status, and I asked him why. He said, I don't see any advantage to being on. Is this suspicious? Well, that's kind of interesting. So you've begun chatting. Is this chatting? Is it just texting or is it on the telephone? Folks, I highly recommend everyone follow my rule called rule. It's my invitation for you. It's called 3, 2, 1, 3. Okay, 3, 2, 1, 3. What that is no more than 3 text or email exchanges should lead to 1 or 2 phone calls that should lead to 1 date, and it should all happen in a 3-week period. Okay, so either this is progressing to meeting each other, or it's just going to be, like I said earlier, a long drawn out therapy session between the two of you. And I'm sure many of you don't want to engage in therapy sessions with people. And when a guy hides his status and he's not engaging in you with the desire to meet you, who gives a shit what he's doing? If it's not progressing to meeting each other, then move on. Don't worry about what someone else does. Now, I'm sure you're curious why they might do that, and you ask the question. And his response was a bullshit response. Because if he liked you, he'd say, like, by the way, when I'm liking someone, I've communicated with them, I begin flirting, I actually disengage all my dating apps because I don't want to be distracted by all the noise from other people. Which it could possibly be that, but I don't get the sense is that, because the way he answered that question, if I understand this correctly, I don't see any advantage to being on it. That's just a weird terminology. If he had said, I don't want to be distracted by other people and I want to invest in you, that's at least could possibly be a sincere thing. It could be a sociopathic line too, but I know I operate that way, and I'm sure there are plenty of men who operate in that same venue as well. So is it suspicious? Most likely. But then again, is it progressing forward? And if it's not, move on. At least that's my invitation for you, Sadie. So thank you so much for that question. I really appreciate it. Folks, we're going to do a short live stream tonight. We'll do a longer one on Friday. I want to thank you all for your love and support. I want to remind you to purchase a super sticker, super chat to donate to the Connor Aslay Scholarship Fund. Certainly check out the links below to a free discovery call with me, to my membership group, to the books I recommend, or you can follow me on Instagram as well. Just want to remind you those 7 ways to survive a long distance relationship. Make sure you plan that first meeting. Who's going to meet whom? Discuss your communication desires. Depending on the distance, plan on seeing each other each weekend or every other weekend. Alternate between each other's homes. Avoid the bubble by spending time in each other's homes for a longer extended period. Make sure you include family and friends. And lastly, make sure you have the where's this relationship going conversation and how we're going to take this from long distance to short distance. I hope you found value in this video. Please post a comment below. I do my best to read them all. All right, I'm going to wrap up this video as I always do. First off, giving myself a big, gigantic Jonathon bear hug of self-love. I'm going to reach into the camera and give you a hug of love. I'm asking you to turn to a friend, a pet, a teddy bear, or a pillow and give it or them a hug of love, because hugs are a great source of love. And let's face it, we could all use more love in our lives. I want to thank you much and wishing you a blessed day. Bye now.